Hello everyone, I'm Philippa Campbell and I'm Head of ANZ's Transaction Banking Business for Australia and Papua New Guinea. It's our absolute privilege to welcome you to today's webinar and to our series of our Future Ready Now webinar series. This is one of a few that we'll bring to you over the next few months, virtually across our global network. So thanks for taking the time to join us. So this program is designed to keep you, our customers, engaged across all the things that we're doing and that's relevant to you. We're looking to share with you some really practical insights as well as some thought leadership in a timely manner with what we think are probably some decisions that are facing you and your organisations, and trying to share with you how we're thinking about it and also some of the perspectives that we get to see across our broad customer base that you might be able to leverage from. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners and the lands on which we're all dialing in from today. I'm dialing in from the land of the Gadigal people here in Sydney, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and would like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and traditional owners on the lands in which you're dialing in from today. So today, this webinar is titled Real-Time Payments Unpacked, Expert Guidance, Customer Wins and Practical Hacks. So as I mentioned, instead of theory, we really want to bring to you some of the insights from some of the experts in adaptation of real-time payments in the Australian landscape. And you're going to hear a bit from our customers and our partners at WorldPay platforms and from BP Australia. Kathleen will introduce Alison and Marcus to you shortly. And we're going to touch base on some of the technologies in the payments landscape, such as Pay2, which is the full payment into accounts, NPP, so new payments platform, not so new anymore, but the ability to make next to real-time payments between accounts, as well as some reconciliation benefits, and confirmation of payee, which is a tool now available to help you protect against fraud and help to check your vendor lists. So we'll talk about this in the context of B2B, so businesses to businesses, and B2C, so business to consumer. So hopefully relevant for your business, no matter where you're dialing in from. And you'll have an opportunity today to ask some questions. So you'll see a Q&A function there in your screen. So please feel free to pop your question in there. You can put your name to it if you'd like, or anonymous, that's no problems. We'd love to hear your questions and we'll get to those towards the end. So please do post those through. So at the end of today's session, we really hope you'll come away with a great understanding of what some of the top corporates are actually doing with real-time payments and Pay2 in this particular geography right now, and hear about some of their fast and early wins. Some guidance on reducing friction in the business and fraud through some of the real-time verification tools that are available, and also how you can create some new customer journeys. I'm really hoping some of these practical tips and wins will help you think about how to guide your business and your journey through real-time payments and some of the technology that is coming available for each and every business in Australia. So thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in a Future Ready Now webinar series. And I'm going to hand over to Kathleen Harker to take us through our Q&A and panel and introduce our panel. Kathleen is an Associate Director in our strategic growth business in transaction banking. She is absolutely a payments expert, and I'm sure you'll look forward to hearing from her. And she'll be moderating this session. So over to you, Kathleen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for making the time to join today's session as part of ANZ's Future Ready Now webinar series. My name is Kathleen, and around here I am known as one of ANZ's self-confessed payment nerds, which means it is quite literally my job to think about what's changing in payments, why it matters, and most importantly, how we make it useful in the real world. So a couple of very quick housekeeping items before we jump in. Today's session is being recorded, so for all of your colleagues who are about to be incredibly jealous that they've missed what is sure to be the most riveting 45 minutes of the week, don't worry, we will have them well covered. As Pip mentioned, the Q&A is open and we will dedicate some time at the end to walk through your questions. Now, before we get too far, I do want to just set the scene on a few of the key terms that you will hear today, because in payments, we are very good at using them interchangeably, which we acknowledge can be confusing. So when we talk about real-time payments in Australia, we're referring to payments that run on the rails known as the New Payments Platform or the NPP. And because these are rails, we like to use a little bit of a train analogy around here, so please bear with me. Think of the NPP as that railway network. So we've got these trains that run along it, which are OSCO, our push payments, or money simply sent from one account to another, and Pay2, which are our pull payments, i.e. where a customer addresses and authorises a business to collect funds from them. Now, those trains don't just move money, they also carry some important services on board to make the journey safer and easier. One of those is PayID, which is simply a more intuitive way of addressing payments, like having your ticket sent straight to your phone instead of needing to remember a long booking reference. Another increasingly important service is confirmation of payee, which helps validate that the account name that you're paying matches the account that you're sending money to. In other words, helping you confirm that you're getting on the right train to the right station before you ever actually leave the platform. Now, real-time payments, despite the name of the platform that they operate on, are officially no longer new. They're a permanent part of Australia's payments landscape. And yet, when we talk to organisations, the question we hear most isn't if real-time payments matter, it's how ready are we actually to operate in that 24/7 environment? Because what we're seeing is this: the rails may be real-time, but in many cases, the operating model still isn't. Processes, controls, customer experience, even internal comfort levels are often still playing catch-up. So that's where today's conversation is going to get practical. There are three things coming together right now. First, the shift away from legacy payment rails is no longer theoretical. Australia is actively moving towards a future where today's direct entry and direct debit payments are migrated onto real-time rails. That's a big change, but also a genuine opportunity to simplify how money moves. Second, expectations have changed. Customers and businesses alike don't just want to be paid quickly. They want certainty, visibility, and context. Not just has the money arrived, but who from, for what, and can I reconcile it without a team of people and a whole lot of spreadsheets? And third, and this is a really, really important shift that we're seeing, there is a growing realisation that payments are no longer just carriages to move money from point A to point B. They're becoming strategic tools that can materially improve customer experience, reduce fraud, and take some of that friction out of operations. The challenge, and therefore the opportunity, is connecting that innovation to the right parts of the business. Because payments innovation is no longer just a treasury conversation anymore. It's one that spans finance, operations, technology, customer experience, and risk. In many ways, that's the new frontier for payments nerds like myself and for treasury teams alike. And when you look at it through that lens, tools like confirmation of payee actually make a lot more sense. They're not just a compliance exercise, but a very practical way to stop errors, rework, and investigations before they ever hit your operations team. So today is about cutting through the hype and getting real, pun very much intended, about what's happening now and what's coming next. So to help us do that, we are joined by four excellent speakers today. First, we have Katrina Stewart, Executive Sponsor for the move to NPP at Australian Payments Plus, who will set the scene on the real-time payments landscape and the industry's immediate priorities as Australia continues this transition. We're also incredibly fortunate to have two ANZ customers, BP Australia and WorldPay for Platforms, who are now a global payments company, join us today to speak about their experiences and bring these solutions to life. BP leaned in early, defaulting to NPP for inbound and outbound flows, and Marcus Bayer, previously Head of Finance Global Business Services at BP Australia, will talk about his experience. Alison Morris is an SVP and GM of WorldPay for Platforms, and she'll bring a platform and merchants lens and a very practical view of how businesses are thinking about and using real-time payments today. And finally, we're joined by Matt Cafferty, Head of Host-to-Host and Integration at ANZ, who will share the bank and delivery perspectives and what it really takes to move from this theory into execution. So before we start, we have one small encouragement for today. Please use today as a prompt to take one concrete next step in your real-time payments journey. That might be reviewing where real-time payments sit in your current operating model, or starting a conversation about where Pay2 could possibly remove friction for your business. We'll share how to connect with our ANZ specialist at the end if that's helpful in taking that next step. But for now, let's get into it. So Katrina, we heard the update last year that the target date for BECS decommissioning is under review. And while we certainly don't advocate for organisations anchoring their adoption decisions to a single decommissioning date, there's clearly a lot of interest in how the industry is thinking about this move to real-time payments more broadly. So from your perspective at AP Plus, could you share how AP Plus and AusPayNet alike is approaching the move to NPP and what organisations should really be paying attention to over the next phase of the transition?
Thanks, Kathleen. I'm really delighted to be here today. I think when we think about the removal of the date and thinking about what that means, it's important to remember that that date really served just a purpose in helping to focus people's attention on the future decommissioning of BECS, and really kind of gave us as an industry a common goalpost to work towards, and started to get some momentum on the transition. And what we're seeing is that a number of different organisations are thinking about what that journey is, what that transition means for them, how they need to engage with their banking partner or payment service provider to think about what that future is going to look like. But one thing that doesn't change is that really as an industry, we have a strategic intention, and also from a government perspective, a strategic objective to modernise our payments infrastructure. And that's really where all of this sort of started, was about thinking about how do we move to the MPP that has more modern payment capabilities. It delivers speed, it delivers 24/7 availability, it has much richer enhanced data that really unlocks a whole range of benefits for businesses. And what we're seeing is that organisations are looking to come on board because they see value in those benefits. They want to be able to benefit from greater payment certainty of knowing the outcome of a payment immediately and not having to wait 2 days. They like the processing efficiencies that the data can unlock from a kind of reconciliation perspective, and what that means in terms of reducing the exception processing that they are seeing. It's building customer trust around customers having additional levels of authorization by being able to have more control over their payments and more visibility to what's happening around things like, is the money going to the organisation or the person that I intend that payment to go towards, and really kind of building that assurance for them. And it's about enhancing customer experiences as well. And so organisations are really thinking about what this transition means for them. From an industry perspective, we're working very closely with AusPayNet and the RBA and Treasury to really define what is the sort of future state of account-to-account payments that we think Australia needs to have over the next 10 or 20 years. And how, as an industry, we think we're going to get there as well in terms of the steps that we need to take. But I think, it's really important to remember that this journey towards modernisation has actually been underway for a number of years now, with organisations leaning in to see what it means for their businesses and where those benefits are, and really starting to think about how they can unlock those benefits sooner rather than later.
Intention there has definitely not shifted, and those benefits are still really immense. So you do have that unique vantage point across banks and corporates and the use cases that they're deploying these technologies for. So in your experience, where are organisations seeing the most success today when they are adopting NPP capabilities, and where should they be starting if they're engaging with real-time payments for the first time?
Yeah, it's interesting. We certainly see a lot of activity across the market, and I think what's really encouraging is that we're seeing adoption across a whole range of different sectors and segments. So, whether that's healthcare, whether that's in the retail or e-commerce space, whether that's the provision of education services, whether it's even your sort of local hairdresser or restaurant using the MPP, whether it's being used for payment of utilities bills or securities and investments. And so the adoption has been really broad in terms of where organisations are seeing benefit from coming on board to the MPP. And that journey can sort of vary a little bit for different organisations, really depending on where they see the benefit. So for some, that might be thinking about how do they receive real-time payments from their customers by using Pay2 or using PayID as a receivable scalable solution. Or maybe they're thinking about how they look to be able to send real-time payments because they see benefits in being able to get immediate payments out to customers, whether that's, say, like an insurance situation, or they want to be able to pay their suppliers in real time, or they're looking at for their employees, and particularly with Payday Super just on the horizon as well, thinking about how do they leverage the capabilities of the NPP for superannuation and also for payroll as well, because there are efficiencies there in terms of being able to use the platform for those types of payments. I think really the key success factor when it comes down to it is really about just getting started, starting to think about what does that journey look like for my organisation? What is the kind of sequencing of activity that I think I need to do that's really going to help me start on this journey, because that will be different for each organisation. But it's about thinking about, where do I start with a pilot? Where do I start with a proof of concept? How do I start to maybe accept payments using Pay2 for new customers? And then later I can think about how I basically expand that capability to my existing customers as well. So it's about starting small, I think, from a kind of test and learn perspective, get those experiences, get those learnings, and then think about how you embed them across your business and your organisation, what that means from a systems perspective and an operations and a process perspective that then enables you to scale as well, and working very closely with your bank or payment service provider to really help you on that journey as well. But I think it's really about just getting started. A lot of organisations might think, this is a big change, it's going to be a really huge effort, just kind of where do I start that? And I think it's trying to break it down into that sequencing and just really sort of dipping your toe in the water to get started.
Fabulous to see so many people on the line today who are hopefully using this to get started on their own journeys as well. Now, we've been speaking a lot about the payments element of the NPP and what that means, but we also briefly touched on these overlay services like PayID and confirmation of payee. Could you please just talk us through how important are these services in the NPP's ecosystem more broadly, particularly when it comes to things like building trust, reducing those failed payments, and also supporting this adoption as we scale?
Yeah, I think they're really critically important. And it's really about why, as an industry, we are looking to modernise our payment rails. It's because of capabilities like PayID and confirmation of payee. In a world where it's a constant battle against fraud and scams, and how we protect customers and also businesses think about what that means for them, and the role that PayID and confirmation of payee will play to help build that trust in a digital world and to provide greater insurance. We've seen from PayID over the years, from some research that we've done, that 1 in 4 users using PayID have actually stopped making a payment, and they've either edited that payment or decided not to make that payment because they actually can see who the payment is going to. And that really provides such critical assurance for people to know, particularly if I'm dealing with, large amounts of money. Maybe I'm, renovating my house and I'm having to pay my builder or another service provider. And it's a really stressful moment if I don't know that actually the funds are going where they're intended. And it's not just from a kind of fraud and scam perspective in terms of maybe my invoice is being misdirected by, a malicious actor, but it's also about mistaken payments as well, and really helping to improve the accuracy of processing of payments as well. And so those capabilities are really important as we think about more payments moving towards a digital world, and how do we build that trust and that assurance? And that's not just from a kind of sort of retail customer perspective, but it has application in the business world as well. So as a business, how do I know that the funds that I'm paying are going to the people or the organisation that they're intended to? And also, how can I utilise capabilities like PayID, which means that I don't actually need to store sensitive customer information in my own environment. And so that kind of reduces some of the risk for me as an organisation. So I think it's all kind of part and parcel of this whole journey towards payments modernisation and why that's important.
Piece is really critical, and some great stats there to see how those have been benefiting real life customers in stopping with those payments where it could have otherwise been a bit of an adverse scenario. So we're going to shift over to Marcus, because we were speaking of customers getting started, and that you have to start on this journey to really reap the benefits. And BP did lean in early to this, defaulting to NPP for some inbound and outbound flows. And really love you to explain today what motivated BP to take such a leading position, and what impact are you seeing for those sort of small family-run distributors who depend on those fast, reliable payments to really run their business?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Kathleen, and thanks for the invite to talk to you today. The journey that we started, it's probably 5 years ago, so this isn't something new to us or something that we just jumped into. It's been a broad strategic intent of BP for quite a long time under some guidance and governance from a board level out of the UK, where we took a position or tried to reposition ourselves in terms of how we manage cash within the BP group. And I think those principles, really, to give everyone a bit of background, were really around making sure that we treated cash within BP as a group asset and not a local one. And I'll describe that a little bit more in a minute. Placing a lot more emphasis on optimizing our liquidity and visibility and control of cash and cash movement. And obviously that drives stakeholder and shareholder value. And the other guiding principle was really around how do we establish a rationale for building a centralized operational cash and banking and treasury operation that really delivers through real-time digital cash application and real-time digital platforms to be able to give us that real transparency over cash position and be able to feed to the group what our cash position was practically on a daily basis, which we over the years haven't really been able to do. So we kicked off a project probably 5 years ago across 52 countries across the BP group that we actually operate in, and more specifically in Australia, when it was our turn to actually roll out new platforms, we kicked off a transition was really around modernising our cash and banking platforms, standardise and automate, be able to deliver real-time visibility of our group cash position and what we were providing back to the group, reduce complexity, reduce fees, but also how do we manage and navigate relationships with key banks and leverage scale across the entire BP group. So falling out of that transformation program was really real-time payments and how we leverage that to deliver the intent of the project. Now, how that actually lands for our customers and how we've seen it translate to real value on the ground in Australia is really through our business partners and through our dealers, distributors. A little bit more background on how BP operate. We've got 300 odd owned sites in Australia, but we have about 1,200 branded BP sites that are all owned by mum and dad businesses, small businesses, etc. Cash flow, cash payment capability, real-time payment capability has really helped us in those relationships to manage and support those businesses through real-time cash flow. We no longer have 2-3 day delays in payment, particularly over weekends. We can make payments real time and we can work with those businesses to support those businesses in what is really a high volume, low margin environment where cash flow is absolutely important. So there's some of the things that come to mind really around why we've jumped at the chance of implementing real-time payments in Australia.
Sort of see how it really was driven out of a decision from an operational efficiency perspective, and that NPP piece really was the solutioning there, but also hearing about that real impact on some of your customers and your businesses as well. So touching on a little bit of what you spoke about there, the move towards real time in some of our conversations has really significantly reduced some of that manual effort and exception handling from the business perspective. You've touched on this a little bit already about what internal challenges this transformation solved, but where are you seeing those biggest wins in terms of operational resilience, accuracy or cost to serve?
And I think in the past, we've always had the challenge of how quickly can we pay, because we always have scenarios pop up in a commercial environment where payments need to be made immediately, etc. So what we've seen real-time payments be able to do is really reduce the amount of manual intervention required by the business in facilitating payments quickly. So direct entry is something that really doesn't exist in our organisation anymore. The NPP's really taken that over. So there's less manual intervention required. We have much fewer exceptions to payments in our hub locations. We've got much more improved accuracy in terms of the way we pay. And I think we've got much cleaner data through the payment platform than we've ever had in prior process, which just allows us to have much cleaner reconciliation processes in the background, and be able to facilitate action on any payments that need to be followed up, changed, etc. So it's been much better from a back office perspective in terms of our efficiency, effectiveness, and being able to respond in real time, so to speak, rather than have manual work to try and resolve issues as they occur. So much more efficient in the back office.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Marcus. It's also great to hear about the benefits, not just from your customers, but also how it helps from the BP business perspective in that operational perspective. And you did touch a little bit on this as well at the start when you sort of so helpfully set the scene on where this decision came from. But what we know with real-time payments is that they do generate that sort of rich data about how money does move across your network. So could you give us a little bit more detail about how you're starting to use this data to improve those forecasting and decisioning on customer experience? And then looking ahead as well, where do you see the biggest opportunities for these data-driven services?
Yeah, look, I think there's two parts to this. One is probably the internal view, particularly around cash forecasting. So one of our key guiding principles is, how do we present cash to the group? And part of that is forecasting. Real-time payments has allowed us to get much better at the forecasting process, and the movement of cash, obviously, through the group is far easier to predict and manage. So that's been really one of the biggest benefits for us internally. But I think what it's also allowed us to do with our business partners, with our dealers, with our distributors, who I mentioned before, really their businesses survive on cash flow, is it's given us really good visibility on, or better visibility on when people are actually getting paid. It's definitely reduced ambiguity around timing of payments and settlement of timing of payments. So there's actually given us a lot of data around when people are receiving payments, when they're not receiving payments, etc. And we've been able to really tie that back to some of the key business drivers within their business that drive their cash flow, which has been great. And it really gives us better insight, or has given us better insight into the cash flow and pressure points of running a small business. And that's important for our business partners, because one of our roles as a business partner is to support our dealers and distributors to do the best they can in a high volume, low margin environment. And it also helps understand transactional timing impact on our partners' individual businesses. And it helps us to work with them to better forecast and better help them manage their cash flow as well, so they can focus on running their business rather than worrying about where the cash is going to come from, the timing of it, and how they're going to pay their next bill, so to speak. So there's been some really good benefits from the data we've been able to use to help support our business partners, over and above the cash forecasting capability that it's improved as well for the BP Group.
I really like that line on letting them focus on just running their business as well. And you touched on a neat point there that we like to talk about with real-time payments, that there's this element of, yes, the money moves in real time, but that real-time information flow is just as powerful. So thank you so much for really bringing that to life today. We're going to move over to Alison now, if we can. So thank you, Marcus, for talking through those NPP flows. We've been speaking a lot about those NPP flows out, but to hark back to my earlier sort of introduction, we now do want to spend a bit of time on that money in piece as well. So Alison, thank you for joining us today to talk through some of your experiences with Pay2 at ANZ. But before we go into a few more detailed discussions on that, could you please just give, for the audience's benefit, a bit of an explanation on WorldPay for platforms and how you support your business customers today?
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen, and thanks very much for the invitation. Look, I'll just start off by saying this is the first group where I can officially say WorldPay is now Global Payments. It's day one of phase 2 of our marketing campaign following the acquisition of WorldPay by Global Payments in January this year. We're one of the world's largest payment technology companies. We process 94 billion transactions a year in 175 different countries. But what's really special about that for us is that there's always been a really sort of deep focus on local expertise, so local payment methods. But we've always invested in innovation. We've always been really focused on bringing expertise and payments into our partners, and none of that's changed under the new global ownership. What I think is a really exciting time for us now, and particularly in the area that I lead across the business, the specific area I work in is the platforms business. Our speciality is embedded payments within software platforms where, and I'll use an example of gym rental platforms, etc., where they want to be able to offer payments as part of their overall value to the individual gyms that are using their software. And for us, that actually has some quite unique user experiences that we'll sort of go through as we sort of talk a bit later on. What's important going back to global payments, it's a really exciting time for us now. As we come together, we're focusing on how we sort of double down and deliver much smarter technology. We want faster time to market. We're looking at seamless payment experiences for both our enterprise and our SaaS partners. And so we're looking to next generation payment experiences, and I put Pay2 in there. We've been really supportive of the Pay2 sort of journey, and really for the last 2 years been very focused on working together with the ANZ about launching this for our customers.
And thank you. We are always excited to be part of an exciting moment there. So thank you for sharing what's happening with the business there. You started to touch on it that little bit, but could you just take us into that little bit more detail on what made Pay2 compelling for WorldPay for platforms and global payments and your platform customers? And then how does this kind of payment innovation really help merchants navigate the rapid changes happening in the industry today?
Look, I think it's fair to say, and I'm just going to start by prefacing saying that because we are in the platform space, actually, whilst we are integrating with larger software platforms, many of the merchants underneath are often small businesses. They quite often don't have time or even knowledge to delve into a lot of this. So for us, it's been really important to be at the front and helping our software partners really understand the kinds of payments that can drive innovation. Pay2 is really a true modern payment experience. It's real time, it's data rich, it lowers risks, but it also empowers the end payer. And so there's a lot to really like about it. What I'm sort of saying there is that there's a lot of value points for different parts of it or different people involved in the transaction. We chose very early on to invest in Pay2 or invest in an internal sense in Pay2. It really aligns with the shift that our platform customers are seeing. A lot of our payments that we process are recurring payments. As you think about gym, childcare, those sorts of things, they're the sort of things that you want to set up, you want to have as a recurring payment, you want security around it. And so those subscription, the digital payments, those usage-based billing models, we really need to reduce the amount of friction and failure that you can see in those. And Pay2 is very helpful in that process, particularly around some of the ability to see are the funds available. And we see a lot in there of reduction of friction within actually the merchant side as well as the customer side. So that innovation is really important. We knew that the platform partners would also see value in being able to bring this to their merchants. There needs to be points of differentiation and they need to be able to show that they're modern and moving forward. And so as you think about going to the comment I made at the very beginning about many of these customers are small businesses, They can't afford to incur losses. They don't have a lot of time to be reconciling, chasing. They don't want the rejected declines of direct deposit, the direct debit transactions coming through. And so as you think about that sort of value, it's really important for our software platforms to be able to try and demonstrate the additional value that they're bringing through into the merchants as well. And so the custom initiated authorizations are a great example of that. There's fewer failed payments, there's less downstream issues that they can sort of see, less friction and rub. And so essentially for us, we've seen that that's been really popular with partners, and we've seen that there's been quite a good uptake and adoption within the merchant space on that.
See that reducing friction point really being a key point echoed here, and also great to hear the synergies between yourself and Marcus earlier about that real end customer benefit and how these decisions are flowing down to ultimately impact them for the better. So that's great. You also mentioned that you did move quite quickly to bring Pay2 to the market. So could you take us through why was being an early mover so important from your perspective, and what did you learn along the way that would help merchants as they get started?
Yeah, look, one of the things that WellPay that we've always recognised, we are global. We talked about the fact that we're in 175 different countries. There is no one-size-fits-all type payment method. We have to really acknowledge that the emergence sort of local payment methods. And I think why, as we think about Pay2, the early adoption was really important to us for kind of a number of reasons, but I'll sort of start off by saying, as we see new payment methods launch, I'll take a step back. Actually, we produce a global payments report annually, and it's a summary of payments by market. And I'll take you back probably 5, 6 years, or perhaps a little longer, 6 years ago. Buy Now, Pay Later was a really good example of something that was coming through that really emerging sort of stage. And then, you see that massive uptake and growth. We knew that with the opportunity that we had here, that we could actually sort of be in the ground floor. It's not noisy. There's an opportunity to start to build out education. We had time to test and learn in that sort of pilot phase. We were really taking that sort of opportunity to, while the market was just a little quieter, to actually sort of step in, build it out, start to get some excitement, interest around it. We didn't want to get into the middle of the noise. The other thing is, as you know, with most technology sort of pieces, there's always going to be the learning process as you go through. And so what we were really sort of critical about was making sure that, as I say, we had it there, we could test it, we could work through, make sure that we had the right pilots, understood the right use cases. I think as we sort of thought about it, interestingly, some of the use cases that we thought would come up immediately, if I can think, for example, rent rolls would be a classic one where we have quite a high rejection rate on sort of direct debit. And interestingly, that's actually been a slower uptake. So for us, it was really important to have that little bit of extra lead time as the market started to grow adoption to actually sort of really get our offering sort of sorted and ready to go. I think we did do it well. We partnered with ANZ. It was a really sort of strong partnership. They sort of helped us through the whole thing, and actually that partnership was recognised last year in the Australian Banking and Finance, the Asian Banking and Finance, as the Australian Payment Solution of the Year award. And I think that's really important because what we called out in that was that criticality of working with our partner, making sure that we've done all of the foundational work as well.
Thank you, and thank you for touching on that partnership, because that really is the role we do want to play in supporting our customers on this journey. But also thank you to talking to that point around starting early and really making sure you get these technologies into your business so you can test and learn and start to benefit from them as that market grows as well. So if I could just ask you just to sum up as well, what advice you would give to merchants considering adding something like Pay2 into their payment offering, particularly those points around building customer trust, offering the right payment choices, as you mentioned, and future-proofing, really?
Well, it's actually really funny because I had to smile as Katrina was speaking. We haven't compared notes. We haven't got anything. And she actually took a little bit of my thunder as we go through it. She gave a really great example. So my primary advice to merchants is very simple. We need to think about this as both a payment method and also a customer experience upgrade. It's actually far easier and effective to offer pay to from day one rather than to migrate mass customers across it down the line. So my first advice would be, think about how do you bring this in for new customers. And that doesn't mean to say new. It could be new to using a particular within our case, for example, we took it to a particular partner who is bringing on a lot of new merchants underneath. And so it made logical sense to actually sort of say, as you bring on a new payer, think about pay too. So for us, it's really important that we thought about who we were going to introduce it to. For our customers, and we talked about the fact that these are people who actually have often a high number of recurring payments where they don't want friction. Essentially, what we didn't want to be able to do is have, for example, the gym software say, hey, we're moving all users on to pay to now. That's the ideal chance for that gym user who hasn't been there for a month and a half to go, oh, you know what, I'm not actually going to renew my subscription. And so it's very important. However, it's also really important to make sure that as a merchant, they offer their payers the right choices. We've got evidence that in certain payers will look for situations where they can find their payment choice readily available. And there are situations where merchants will actually see somebody move away because that payer may feel much safer using pay to for the security it offers. And if it's not there, they'll often go and look for another place to be able to use that. And so I think it's really important, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we help provide, all of those different payment methods across, and pay to is certainly a key piece of that. So essentially what we are looking at is a transition into the future state. We're not suggesting that people should cut off their current payment methods. However, as we're starting to see adoption across the broader community, Amazon more recently, etc., where we're seeing other people are also using it, it's getting that customer acceptance, it's getting the merchant acceptance, it's seeing the mass and the norm, but actually doing it in a very careful and measured way so that it's accretive to your business and not actually causing any friction. So I think that's probably the key pieces that I can give you about advice.
No, and that's excellent advice there about really taking that measured approach to getting started and really looking at where it makes the most sense to get started from a business perspective, but making sure you are on the journey so that we don't let anyone get left behind as part of this. And that actually is going to segue nicely into Matt, who's going to help us really understand how do you get started as part of this journey on a technical perspective. So as a first question, Matt, a common concern we hear is that moving to real-time payments requires a big rebuild of your payment system. So in reality, how do customers typically get started, and how do you help them adopt those real-time payments in a phased and manageable way?
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, look, there's a lot of thoughts about how we can do this, and we talk about APIs, we talk about files, and alike. I think, firstly, though, from an integration and a host-to-host, I'm going to go back to the train analogy that we used earlier. File active and host-to-host is the automated train, right? We haven't got a driver. It goes from station to station. Everything's nice and secure inside, so we can do what we want within the train carriage. What customers don't realize is we can actually start to uplift what they already have. We can take what they're already doing from a file-based perspective and move that into real-time rails. Ultimately, we control the direction that takes. Our advice to customers is to start to move towards newer formats away from the traditional old ABA file and move to ISO. And a lot of that is more based on the flexibility and the reconciliation that we have around that. NPP offers a lot more data enrichment in them flows and in them payments, not just for our customers and what we can send them. We can send them, not just a message to say payment from Matt, or we can send a payment from Matt. We can start putting smiley faces and other emojis off the back of that as well. So, it's a lot of enrichment around that and a lot of traceability. But we don't have to start with the bells and whistles to begin with. We can start to talk about how we can take current payment streams and current payment flows and move them. And it was mentioned earlier about, Katrina mentioned to start small. We don't need to just change everything over. The stats are really interesting about how we see the uplift from direct entry into MPP real-time payments. We only see, a really small percentage, and I'm saying less than 5% at the moment of payments going down the MPP rails. That means 95% of everything is going over direct entry. It doesn't need to be like this. Of them, about 70% of our payment flows are all individual payments. We can start to look at how we can move them payments across the rails and onto MPP. And that's, everybody's talked about the benefit of that and the benefit of taking what would be, a payment that could receive in 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on the exchange. But we can start to do that immediately. And that means then you can reconcile. And the reconciliation that you're getting is no longer the reconciliation just from the bank's perspective, but also from the end-to-end perspective that your customer, your vendor, or alike has received that money into their bank accounts. So I don't think we need to think on this as, well, I need to go replace my ERP. I need to do a heap of development. We can do that because we can also work about how your processes are better and what the needs are. But we can certainly look at how we can do things a bit quicker with what's already there.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thank you for legitimising my train analogy as well. I appreciate you rolling it through as part of that. So you do spend a lot of time doing that solution designing aspect that you just spoke about with customers. So how do you help them choose between things like APIs or file-based processing or platform integrations? And what gives customers the confidence that ANZ can support them as these volumes do scale?
Absolutely. Look, we as File Active was never built and never put in place there just to be a vanilla blanket solution for customers. It is market leading because we work with customers on how we can, work on their end-to-end flows and not just, here's a file format, you go figure it out. What we like to do with customers is understand what their business purpose is and their business use case is to understand really what they're trying to achieve from that. If they are wanting to hit a button in their own system and they want a payment, to be spat out the back of it and onto the vendor or the person, well, then we look at API-based solutions because that's what's really needed from there. If we're looking at how we're going to take today's batch payments and move them into real-time payments, well, then we don't need to get in the way of that. We can still take that down the file-based solution and still use that same mechanism there. I just don't believe, we have to go through and do them big engineering tasks to enable that. Like I said, when we start to move further and forward with a lot more that we do, again, from an industry perspective, well, then we look at how we re-engineer, then we look at how we do things. But certainly from how do we attack that and how do we do that now? Well, that's where, our customer solution and our customer engineering teams come out and we figure out the best way to do that. And we have that language that we can talk to both your business people, but also, your engineering and your development teams as well about the best way to do that. And we've got great tools behind us and great information and documentation, like our developer portal that you can go to and you can have a look at how things are done from a data flow and a configuration perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And thank you again to all of our speakers for such a thoughtful and practical discussion today. What I really hope has come through is that the shift that we spoke about at the start, that payments are no longer just carriages moving money from point A to point B. They're becoming strategic tools that improve customer experience, reduce fraud, and remove friction, as our speakers have spoken to today. And that question that we are often most asked is, how hard is it to get started? And the reality is, from what Matt's just spoken to, it is far more achievable than many people expect. So our message really is that simple, and that is to start now and to start somewhere. And the real opportunity is not just adopting new payment rails, but connecting payments innovation to the right people across your business. So if today's conversation has sparked some ideas or made you curious about what real-time payments could unlock in your organisation, we'd love to continue that discussion. Now, we do have a few elements of Q&A coming through, so please do stay on the line and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. So if I can direct the first one to yourself, Katrina, hopefully this is a relatively straightforward answer, but could you please just help the audience understand, is confirmation of payee a bank-specific solution or is it an industry-wide offering?
Thanks, Kathleen. So confirmation of payee is an industry-wide solution. that all of our participating financial institutions are starting to offer to their customers. And it basically is enabling those organisations to confirm the actual account name that's associated with an account and provide that back to the organisation and the customer that's making that payment beforehand. I think part of the question was also around how that might be different, say, from name check that CBA offers, which is really about that's more built around kind of sort of using sort of information around payments that have been made sort of historically, rather than actually confirming the legal account name that's associated with an account. And so it was felt from an industry perspective really important to enable that capability industry-wide as a way to help combat fraud and scams.
Excellent. Thank you, Katrina. Matt, we've got the next one for you, if I can, that given that NPP processes payments individually line by line, as opposed to sort of that traditional batch method that we see in our ABA files, how will this impact automated bank feed reconciliation in accounting softwares?
Look, I think I mentioned a stat just earlier. Around 70% of our payments are actually single line payments anyway. They're individual payments. Most of our customers are doing individual payments because from a bank statement and reconciliation perspective, we want to see that line information bit by bit or line by line so we can reconcile that in. I don't think there's a major shift around how we work and how we operate that. We can still do batch-based NPP payments. We can multi-credit payment, single debit, multi-credit payments through the NPP rails. So again, I don't think this is a major shift of how we do that. We see things like payroll, etc., coming through these. They're the really big batch files that we process. But again, I would encourage everybody to start to look to move their payroll into NPP just to give that safety and security that the payments are flowing to all the employees to make sure they get paid and get their bills paid and not be held up by something else going on from an industry or a processing perspective. But there's no real change from a reconciliation. The big changes, though, that we see is the enriched information and the big data flow that we put in and we can post back to you that isn't fixed into 120 characters within a line and a direct entry file is where the enrichment, and we can really start to push out some automated and some better and cleaner reconciliation pieces around that. Similarly, from a real-time payments perspective, we also have the ability to tell you when you're getting money sooner. So if an NPP payment is coming in, well, then we have services like a real-time notification where from a bank, we can push and tell you that that money's entered your account. So it's not a case of going and checking your bank account and getting a refresh to see if that money's there. We've now got the tools because the money is real-time and coming in real-time. Well, then we can tell you in real time when that's in as well. And similarly, you can reconcile that and have trust and confidence that when your bank statement comes tomorrow morning, it'll match the payment that we told you about during the day that when you received it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It really connects to that point that Marcus was speaking about earlier about that real-time information flow and that data that comes with these payments as well being really beneficial. I'll ask you to stay there for 1 second just to touch on a question that's coming through about pay-to agreements for business customers. Could you just touch on ANZ's availability in terms of pay-to agreements for business customers where we have 2 signatories or more? And then I'll throw to you, Katrina, to talk a bit more about that industry level perspective.
Well, you're the payments expert and the payments nerd. I thought you had a pay-to question. I thought you want to take it.
It's an easy answer that we're ready and we're available, and we have had those up and ready for a while. So our corporate customers that do have those multi-signatory accounts can be enabled for pay-to agreements and accepting pay-to agreements there, which is great.
I was just going to add as well, though, just on the multi-signatory stuff as well. One of the really big things around pay-to, and not everybody is using it, and it's gradually being rolled out from an industry perspective, but it puts the control back into the consumer about their mandates. So I don't have to get that piece of paper anymore and sign my name at the bottom to say it's okay to do a direct debit, and then it goes off into the ether. I get a notification in my ANZ Plus app to say, I'm accepting this pay-to, I'm accepting this gym membership for the 3rd time in 6 months that I've changed gyms because I'm going to start going now. So it's a huge difference from that perspective and puts the controls right back into your own hands and into your own bank account.
Yeah, thank you. And Katrina, could I ask you just to comment on the broader business account reach from a pay-to perspective and that work AP Plus is doing with banks in and around that?
Yeah, so it is an area of focus. I mean, a lot of the initial focus with Pay 2 was on retail customers, and we have about 90% of retail customer accounts enabled. For business accounts, the majority are enabled where it's one to sign. There are some of the banks who are still focusing on enabling their business accounts that have multi to sign on that account, because that is a slightly more complex process. But it's certainly an area where we're working very closely with our banking organisations to get that in place.
Excellent. And I'll ask you to stay there because there's another area that we're working quite closely with AP Plus and the banks alike, and that is how is the MPP thinking about that batch payment piece? As we've noted before, it is sort of that one-to-one mechanism at the moment. So what's the work happening around that?
So there's been work going on for a while now around how, from a platform perspective, we might look at processing payments in bulk across the MPP. And that's really about how that would work between the banks who are sending and receiving those payments. And so we've been doing some detailed design work with participating financial institutions to see, is that a service that we're going to look to build and develop on the MPP? But I think it's important to reinforce the message that kind of Matt was saying, is that a lot of payments that are submitted today in bulk to banks can be processed across the MPP today, and a lot of banks have the ability to take those files and debulk them and process them across the MPP as single payments, and we're seeing that happen today already.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll throw one more your way if I can get you to stay there. We'll get you to pop back on. But is the industry as well doing that engagement with ERP providers as well in relation to their readiness for real-time payments?
Yes, 100%. It's a really key area of focus for us, because there is a critical dependency around those ERP providers being ready in terms of their capability and their offerings and how they can support their corporate customers to move across to the MPP. So we've been engaging with a number of them to help support them as they think about their plans and what they're looking to do. And I think it's really encouraging that over the last 12 months, we've seen some really great momentum there, and a number of them starting to move into, pilots and proof of concepts as well.
Yeah, it's great. That's excellent, because that is really one of those key drivers that will help support a number of our customers as they do make this move as well. Matt, an extra one for you here. Can you just answer, hopefully this one's relatively quick as well, what happens in the case a recipient does not currently use the NPP and we try to pay via NPP? Do they instantly reject?
Yeah, look, again, we can configure that and set that up, certainly from a host-to-host perspective of how you want that to do that. We call that step down. So payment comes in, we try to do it via the MPP rails, we get a rejection for whatever reason, not addressable, and then we step that down and we process that via DE, or we send it back to you because you might want to go and check that data on there. Again, it's not a blocker for moving this stuff forward. It's not a blocker for moving your payroll forward. The addressability and the reachability of MPP accounts now is above 97, 98, 99%. So the amount of accounts that have been enabled for this is really significant. So we see this by exception, and certainly for some of the large batch payments that we process through MPP, and a lot of that is moving payroll as well. We only see 1 or 2 payments dropping out from that perspective. So yeah, it's not a blocker to do 99% of your payments down the rails.
Yeah.
Or the train line, sorry.
Thank you. Definitely the train line. No, absolutely. And part of really what we do want to message here is that we are here to support through that transition phase and really help you solution as to what makes the most sense for your business. So unfortunately, we are actually coming up to time. So I do want to just take a moment again to say another huge thank you to our speakers for joining us today, particularly to Marcus and Alison for sharing your real life use cases and your real life wins as part of adopting these NPP solutions, to Katrina for your industry expertise, and Matt for your technical expertise as well. A replay of today's session will be available on demand, along with the Bankable Insights fact sheet. Please do also scan the QR code that you can see on screen to learn a bit more about our next webinar on real-time treasury, which we will be hosting on May 6th. Thank you again for joining us, and we do really look forward to hosting you next time.